Joey Mack, co-chair of the CICEP Member Development and Nominating Committee. And our jobs are to come up with slates of people to nominate for positions on CICEP committees, but more importantly, I think, and particularly for today, to provide information to members that gives them a little bit of a better sense of what CICEP is and what it does, and also entices you to think it is so interesting that you want to join our merry band. And so, Jim, I think we'll go to the second slide, which has all of our wonderful photos.
Okay. Yep. There
we
go.
are. So my co-presenters today are Jim Woodell, the fearless leader of all of this at APLU. And Joey, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm looking here, Jan, frantically and noticing that it doesn't seem Joey's gotten online with us yet.
Oh, well, that might be another reason to move slowly.
Okay, we're going to speak slowly now.
That's right, we're going to speak very slowly.
Dorothy's with us, or she's at least logged in online, and she should be with us via audio shortly.
Okay, great.
So, in fact, we'll not just slow down, we'll just come to a screeching halt here for a moment. Still no Joey.
Someday they're going to invent a technology that truly makes all this seamless.
Yeah, exactly. Hi there, Joey. Have you joined us?
Hi, I have. I was actually on the phone earlier, but I guess you guys couldn't hear me, so I got my computer to work, though. So sorry for the technical difficulties.
No worries. We're glad you're here. I think we're ready to continue on then, Jan.
Okay. So, Joey, we had just turned to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Again, sorry for the entrance. Again, I'm Joey Mack. I'm the Director of Innovation and Economic Development here at the University of Illinois, and I am proud to be Jan's co-chair on the nominating committee for CICEP, a role that I've been in for just a few months. I know there's been a lot of interest around CICEP, and I think there are a number of folks who are participating today who were able to join us in Raleigh a couple weeks ago at so we're really excited to provide a little bit more detail about some of the great things that are coming out of this commission, and look forward to hopefully meeting many of you who I haven't already. So thanks.
So our expert commentary today is going to come from 4 people who have been very involved with CICEP or with CICEP processes in the past several years, and those include Terry Helmlinger-Ratcliffe from North Carolina State, Suzanne Taylor from Texas Tech, and we know Suzanne is on the line, Dorothy Eyre from University of Cincinnati. Dorothy, are you with us?
Dorothy is on the line, and I just unmuted her.
Okay.
Hi,
right.
Dorothy. And
Hi.
Mark, and Mark Clark from the University of Houston. Mark, are you on with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, I think we are good. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
And Jan Terry has also joined us. I'm unmuting her now.
Yay. Hi, Terry. Are you with us?
Yes, I am. Somebody had me muted.
Yes, I think Jim's trying to keep us quiet for some reason or other. That's what I think it is.
Just trying to manage the background noise. That's all. But we've got everybody who's speaking unmuted. If I could, Jan, just quickly say to everyone else, we do have everyone muted largely because we have to avoid as much background noise as we can. But if you have something that you want to say or ask, please do use the little questions area on your control panel, and we'll make sure that we unmute you so that you can share your question out loud and get you engaged. So sorry about that, Jan.
All right, sounds perfect. Okay, Jim, if we could go to the next slide. I think you are going to be up first. You're going to talk a little bit about APLU.
Yes. Okay, so APLU is, as it says here, a research policy and advocacy organization. We work with, we have members, research universities in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, 238 of those members. About 200 of them are university campuses, individual campuses, but we also have a number of members that are university systems and a few affiliated organizations as well. As it says here, we were founded in 1887, making us the oldest higher education association in North America. You know, we serve our members across a variety of issues, from, you know, research policy to, you know, how our members engage in international initiatives. We have a strand of work here that works with our members around student affairs. We work closely with our provosts and senior research officers. And of course, we serve APLU member institutions presidents through a variety of advocacy and research work that we do. So that's kind of the broad perspective on APLU. The association is organized, the membership is organized into councils and commissions. The councils are generally focused on a kind of particular sort of vertical strand within the institution, basically by job title. So we have a council of presidents, for example, our council on academic affairs, which is all of the provosts from our member institutions, our council on research, which is the senior research officers, and so forth. So these different councils each represent, as I said, a sort of specific kind of job title within the institution, and that area of, or that function within the institution. Complementing the councils are our commissions, which are designed to really be cross-cutting. So these are more kind of horizontals at our institutions. Our commissions deal with topics and issues that kind of span across the institution. And as such, the commissions also engage people from throughout the institution. The Commission on Innovation, Competitiveness, and Economic Prosperity, CICEP, what we're here to talk about today, is one of those commissions. But you see here a number of our other commissions listed as well.
Well, and you know, Jim, one of the reasons that I listed the commissions was that I find that the commissions often overlap in their activities.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. In fact, they overlap, but they also overlap, obviously, with some of the councils as well. So it's, for example, I work not only with CICEP, the Commission on Innovation, but I also work with APLU's Council on Engagement and Outreach, and there's a really significant amount of overlap between the interests of those two groups. And so we try as much as possible to have our various groups collaborate with one another on various things, including the summer meetings that they all have, and on sessions at the annual meeting, and where appropriate on other initiatives as well.
Great. Okay, Joey, I think you're up next, and you're going to talk a little bit about CICEP's Economic Engagement Framework, which is kind of the philosophy of CICEP, how universities might get into activities that are centered in economic development and economic engagement.
Absolutely. Thanks for that intro, Jan. So, you know, as Jan just mentioned and Jim alluded to, you know, CICEP has a number of activities that it's undertaken, and certainly in addition to being a great convening point for many of us who are working in the economic university development space, they've, over the past several years, developed this economic engagement framework. So I'll give a very quick overview about what that looks like. And really, this economic engagement framework, it's a couple of things. It's a process, and it's also a set of tools that help to alleviate two pain points that a lot of universities are grappling with every day. The first one being, how do we do a better job of telling our story, of telling the impact and telling the story behind what universities are doing as it relates to economic development? The second pain point is, once we figure out how to tell that better narrative, how can we use that narrative to inform better decision making in the future? So really, this CICEP economic engagement framework was APLU's response to those pain points, which they kept hearing over and over again from their member institutions. And in this environment, when state budgets are continuing to shrink, in this environment, when traditional models of education are continuing to be disrupted every day, having a framework that can help us as institutions demonstrate and clearly articulate our value and our relevance to a diverse set of stakeholders is more important than ever. So this is the framework that was developed, and it's a simple one that has 4 pieces: know, measure, tell, and engage. And before we go on to the next slide, I will just say that this framework was put together through a process that occurred over a number of years, and with input and participation from a whole slew of contributors, including many of the APLU member institutions that are on the phone right now, as well as other external stakeholders. So this is kind of the culmination of that work in progress. If we can go to the next slide, please, I'll walk you through the 4 pieces. So, so again, the know, measure, tell, engage. I'll walk you through each of these. The first one is really about awareness. Institutions should know what they're doing well and what they need to improve with regard to economic engagement, because more often than not, there's a ton of activity that's happening on your campuses that have an economic impact. But if there's a lack of awareness about those activities, it's really hard to stitch those activities together with the broader narrative that you or your leadership are trying to tell about your institution. This is something that we've certainly struggled with at my institution. It's something that we hear from a lot of other institutions all the time, especially those that have a large research footprint. So building that common awareness across a campus is a key goal of this framework. The second piece, measure, speaks to the metrics. Institutions should be able to measure the extent of their economic engagement. Once you've identified an activity or a set of activities that are happening on your campus, you need to be able to reasonably quantify that impact. Certainly there are existing tools already on the market. There are things that have been put out by groups like Autumn, there's the Carnegie classification, and a number of other different ways of measuring economic impact. But the framework that was developed through CICEP, I think, is really adding on to that. A lot of institutions are engaged in so many other activities that anecdotally have an impact, but perhaps lack that rubric to put that impact into numbers. So that's another piece that this framework is seeking to provide. The third piece is about communications. Institutions should be able to tell the story of their contributions to economic development. Once you know what your university is doing through the know and through the measure processes, once you have the tools that enable these things to happen, whatever your goals are, it becomes much easier to explain your university's impact, regardless of who your audience is, whether it's legislative leaders, whether you're trying to recruit the best students or the best faculty. Depending on the goals that your institution has set, being able to have that awareness and have a way of measuring that will aid in refining the communication strategy that your university would need to embark on. And then the final piece of the framework comes to engagement. When you know what's happening, when you can measure it, and when you can build a story around it, it becomes a lot easier for institutions to engage in a meaningful way with external stakeholders, be it industry, other academic institutions, or the general public, which in turn can open the door for future or deeper engagements down the road. So there are a number of tools and guides that were developed to help put this know, measure, tell framework into practice. So I think I'm going to kick it back over to Jen, who's going to talk through some of those tools and guides.
Great, thanks, Joey. Yeah, let's go back 2 slides for a second, Jim. So back to the picture. So you see here in the know, measure, tell, engage framework that there are a number of pieces that are inserted at different points in this continuum of knowing, measuring, telling, and engaging. I'm going to talk about several of those. Each of these tools was designed to help with a particular part of the framework. So now, if we go forward 2 slides, we'll talk about 3 of these tools that have been developed. And one of the things I've observed about the development of these tools is that they're all, to some degree, works in progress. So there are published documents about each of them, but nobody thinks these aren't living, breathing entities. These things will grow and change over time. So Jim, if we could hop forward a couple of slides. There we go. I'm going to talk first about the CICEP assessment tools. So these are assessment tools for examining the role of universities in economic development. The assessment tools are part of the knowing, especially the knowing, although they can be used for other purposes. But if you really want to understand the broad swath of economic engagement at your university, these assessment tools will help you in that process. So the assessment tools contain 2 parts. There is an institutional self-study tool, and there's a tool for stakeholder input. Both of them are surveys that can be administered to a broad range of constituencies, and they ask questions in 6 different areas. These are sort of the principles of engagement. The degree to which the institution engages and asserts institutional leadership in economic engagement. The degree to which the institution creates a supportive culture for economic engagement. The degree to which the university ensures that university activities benefit the public. The degree to which the institution contributes to the development of an innovation economy in its region. The degree to which an institution promotes openness, accessibility, and responsiveness to its stakeholders, and the degree to which the institution communicates contributions, successes, and achievements that benefits the region. So there's a set of survey questions for each of both the institutional self-study for basically internal stakeholders and a piece for external stakeholders or other types of input. And it's up to the institution to determine, first of all, how these tools are used. You can use them to gather information. You can use them to generate discussion. You can also use them to create strategies for enhancing both the impact of your activities and your ability to communicate about them. I think these tools are particularly useful because the document guides you as much about the tool itself in thinking about how you want to use them, why you might want to use them, ways you might want to modify them to suit the needs of your particular institution. Some of the questions might not be relevant to what you're trying to find out. Some of them might need to be reworded slightly to reach the stakeholders and really get the information you're trying to get to. And modification is highly encouraged. The tool document also gives you pointers to other kinds of data you might collect at the same time to supplement the survey results, to give you a more complete picture of your economic engagement activities in a particular area. For every question that is in the survey, the respondent is asked to say, how important is this to you as a stakeholder, and how is the institution doing on this particular question? And I think both of those provide an important perspective as well. And your stakeholders can be a lot of different people, you know, so your external stakeholders could be your research collaborators, your vendors, customers, partners in policy, technology licensees, alumni, parents. Your internal stakeholders can be faculty, they can be students, they can be tech transfer officers, they can be university leadership. So there's lots of different stakeholder groups that you might engage with. Now, one of our commentators who's on today was very involved in helping to put together the assessment tools, and that's Dorothy Eyre. And Dorothy, I thought you might want to talk for a minute about how these came together and whether you think they have realized what it is you want them to have realized.
I will be happy to try to do that. So in terms of those 7 categories that Jan just mentioned, and I won't repeat them all, those represent, there was some preliminary work that was done to look at across different kinds of assessment tools and looking at information from the experts on economic engagement. And out of all of those things, they pulled together some common threads, and they all seem to come together around those 7 areas that Jan mentioned. So then we put together, and there was an awful lot of hard work that went into the putting this survey together, because Jan's already alluded to the fact that you can modify these according to your purposes. So you have to consider what are the specific questions you need to get at, and why are you asking those questions? What do you hope to get out of it? Who are you targeting? Because all of that has some implications for how you use it and what you how you're going to handle this. But there also has to be some commonality, because one of the things that we felt was important in putting this together was we all have to be working with the same definitions of what we need by economic engagement and some of the other terms. We also, because universities were being asked more and more to provide more verification of what they were doing and how do we know that we're doing those things, we also needed to have generate some information that crossed all of our universities. So we wanted a common core, yet some flexibility. And then we went out and we tested all of these. There were a lot of dry runs with this. We used them inside our own universities, and then came back and said, people had trouble asking these questions or answering them because of some ambiguity. Same we did with our external stakeholders, and Jan alluded to the fact that there are 2 versions, the external stakeholders and internal audiences. The questions are pretty much parallel. It's just being targeted to different stakeholders with very slight modifications to do that. But when you modify them, my personal opinion is, and having been part of the pilot group, and we also got a lot of feedback at CICEP summer meetings and workshop sessions. So we really did a lot of work in finessing this. But if you're going to use it, and we hope that people are inclined to use it, because there's some great information that I think you can take away from this. Not all of the information, but a great foundation that you do you kind of keep it together in its entirety to get that common information so you can compare yourself against other universities, and we can create some common messages across our university system, and yet have some flexibility to build in what you want to do with it and what you need by either adding some questions or emphasizing some things in a little more detail than others. For now, maybe that's enough, because we're probably going to come back to talking about some of these assessment tools when we get to the IEP universities.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dorothy. So the second tool is the New Metrics Field Guide, Measuring University Contributions to the Economy. And this was also a document that was years in the making. The metrics working group existed for a long time. As I remember, they may have gotten started as early as maybe 2009. And they arose from the realization that economic engagement is becoming a more complex thing. There are so many different ways in which university activities contribute to the regional economy, but that the tools for measuring economic engagement had sort of lagged behind the complexity of activities that we as universities were engaging in. So the New Metrics Field Guide was an effort to come up with other things you could measure besides some of the standard stuff we were already measuring. So we were already measuring a lot of things related to tech transfer, number of new startups, number of licenses granted, number of patents applied for, number of patents received, sort of the standard measures that Autumn takes care of. But there were a lot of other things that weren't really being captured that nevertheless had a strong role in our economic engagement activities. So from 2009 to its final publication in 2014, it went through a variety of stages. In the early stages, there were 56 different indicators that were identified. And then volunteer organizations were sought to hold regional stakeholder meetings and kind of get a sense of which of these 56 items were things that were important to our stakeholders. So if we were going to count something, we wanted somebody to care about why we were counting it and whether we were counting it. So Ohio State, where I am, was one of the universities that held one of these regional stakeholder meetings where we brought in both internal and external stakeholders. Some of those were government partners, some of those were business partners, some of those were policy people, some of those were internal stakeholders like faculty and leadership of our various units in the university that touch economic engagement. And what we did at Ohio State was replicated 22 other times around the country. Those led to a set of focus group discussions that finally yielded 20 metrics. So we got the number down from 56. They fall into 3 different categories. One of the categories involves our relationships with industry. And this includes things like number of grants coming in from private sector entities, the dollar value of those grants, data on clinical trials, number of industry consortia, things like that. The second category was a broad category called developing the regional and national workforce. And because workforce development is a huge part of the way we impact the regional economy. And this included measures like number of students paid on external grants, number of entrepreneurship courses for students, number of capstone requirements for students, number of student-led startup businesses, things like that, where our role in preparing the future workforce and its impact on the regional economy could be measured. And then the third category was more related to tech transfer, including incubators and business accelerator programs, where you might measure the amount of equity capital raised, the number of FTEs employed in such activities, and other measures related to that. So the new metrics field guide gives you a set of possible metrics you could use to supplement some of the more traditional measures we were already doing. One of the things I like a lot about this document is it also includes a number of what they call logic models that describe the process of coming up with measures of your impact. And in particular, I like logic models that clearly differentiate what are inputs from what are outputs, and how outputs are different from outcomes, and how outcomes in turn are different from impact. And that you want to think about that entire continuum from input all the way to impact. And that you don't just want to measure outputs, but you really want to think about how those outputs, whether they matter. Are they really going to give you a sense of how your university activities are finally creating impact in your regional economy? Now, Terry, you're on the phone, Terry Humlinger-Ratcliffe, and you were very involved in the new metrics field guide as well, and I thought you might want to talk a little bit about your view of how the metrics guide came out.
And Terry, you've muted yourself, and I can't unmute you, so you'll need to unmute yourself in order to talk.
Thank you,
Terry?
Jim.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Jim. And thank you, Jan. Yes, I was actually, I think I was in the very first group that started putting, in fact, metrics is the reason I was invited to join CICEP to contribute to this metrics, because it was something we were dealing with at NC State is how do we measure the unique contribution that we made in our economic engagement. And the logic models, I am really hung up on the logic models, and I really appreciated the fact that became kind of the centerpiece for this field guide, because it gave us a way of talking about how, with a variety of stakeholders, gives us a way to talk about how we contribute to the larger picture. If people want to see more jobs, or if they want to see a better downtown, we can't just write a prescription for those things. But what we can do is we can sit down and talk to them through some kind of a logic model. I mean, obviously you can't introduce a logic model, but you can talk to them about how these are the activities that we have going on that might contribute to this, and then form a kind of a logic chain for them in your partnership discussions as to what you hope to make out of this. The new metrics give us a common, standardized foundation on which to build. One of the things that I feel, and Jan, I think you said this, but I want to emphasize it. There are no common standardized metrics for economic engagement, and this gives us at least a beginning and a starting point. If we measure ourselves and we are talking about how great we're doing because of the way we measure ourselves, that may be completely mean nothing compared to somebody who's measuring themselves differently. So this starts to give us a common language, a common rubric to measure ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree, because before that it was kind of the Wild West in terms of what people were choosing to count. And this provides some degree of consistency across universities. To the degree that you use these measures, then you can actually, first of all, look at your performance changes year over year, and you can also use these to help tell your story to your stakeholders. So the last document I want to talk about very quickly is the Economic Impact Guidelines. And these are slightly different. This is a guidebook for how universities might want to use the traditional input-output model economic impact assessment, where universities used to use these and come up with basically a leveraging number, a sort of an ROI, for every dollar that you give to the university, we create this much improvement in the regional economy. And we ran into a problem as a university community, which was that people were using these, but they weren't using them correctly. And there were a lot of underlying assumptions, and there are some specific models and specific do's and don'ts for doing an economic impact analysis, one of these traditional analyses. So first what we did was we put together a workshop on traditional economic impact analysis. This workshop was held, I think, 2 years ago now. Well, seems like forever. In DC, and we invited constituency from the APLU to come, people that are interested in doing this kind of work. This set of guidelines sort of gives you the ground rules for how you might do it. This helps to combat the perception among many statisticians and the resulting publications in a number of journals about how universities were overinflating their contribution to regional economy. If you use these tools correctly, they can be very powerful. If you use them incorrectly, they can create an impression that simply is not correct. And so if your university is thinking about doing a traditional economic impact analysis, which I will tell you is extremely time-consuming, but worth it if you do it, this book gives you some guidelines for what you should and should not do. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Joey, who's going to talk next about the IEP Universities program.
Thanks, Jan. And before I jump in, if I could just make one little commentary note. I think Jim just uploaded drafts of these assessment tools, the new metrics field guide, as well as the impact guidelines, which if you're joining this webinar from your computer, you should be able to access from your control panel. You can just click it and it should open the PDF. So that way you should be able to get copies of this. And if you're joining by phone, you can't get it, we can certainly make that available to you. It's also on the website.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. If I could also jump in just quickly, you just click on the handouts item on your control panel for the webinar, and those 3 PDFs, they're not actually the drafts, they're the final versions of those documents, and you're welcome to access them that way. And as Joey says, we can also make sure that folks have the URL to go to get the those documents as well. And Jan and Joey, I was also going to ask if we can take a question before you proceed. We've got a question from one of our participants.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. So Sean Crossland, I'm unmuting you, and we'd love for you to jump in with your question.
Sure. I guess the shortest of my question would be, what role do community colleges have in this conversation? And then I could elaborate if necessary. But
Well, I'll jump in. Community colleges, I think, are very important in the economic engagement landscape, both in the workforce development piece, because a number of community colleges engage in not just degree programs, but also entrepreneurship programs. I know of community colleges that are engaged in business incubation. So I think there are a number of pieces of the whole economic engagement framework that community colleges play a critical role in.
Yeah, and I would add to that quickly that you know, these tools, even though they have the word university all over them, they certainly are quite applicable to really all institutions of higher education. I mean, there might be some aspects of them. For example, in the metrics, we have measures that really would only apply, in some cases they don't even apply to all research universities. For example, there's a metric about clinical trials, which, you know, many of our research universities don't even have a medical school. So, but in general, I think all of these tools are quite applicable, and certainly the overall framework of know, measure, tell, and engage, we think is a really powerful framework for all institutions of higher ed. I think I might have interrupted somebody else there. Sorry about that.
Oh, this is Dorothy. I was just going to maybe echo a little of what you were saying by just stating that that's the beauty of the tools that have been put together. They were not ever designed as a one-size-fits-all. They were really designed in such a way that once you've defined your purpose, who your audience is, etc., you have put together what your approach and your needs are, you can do whatever aspects of this match your needs. You don't have to just take the survey out and do it the way it is and have people saying, well, we don't do that. I mean, you already knew that. So you do tailor it to your needs. But I can't think of any academic institution that wouldn't be able to identify with at least the majority of what's there.
And may I add, Jan, this is Terry Helminger Radcliffe. I would add that they can provide a great framework for building partnerships, deciding what roles and responsibilities are, particularly if you use the logic models, and what things are you going to measure, and who's going to be responsible for contributing to what metric.
That's really a wonderful point, Terry, because we tend to think about assessment tools in terms of what's been, not as a tool for where we headed. I'm glad you made that point.
Yeah, I think that's a particularly important point. Let's move now to how people might put some of these tools to work in going after the IEP University designation and the IEP Awards. And Joey, I think it's back to you.
Thanks, Jan. That's actually a really good segue. Appreciate those earlier comments. And in the interest of time, I'll try to be succinct here. But as Jan mentioned, now that we've got these assessment tools, the impact guidelines, the new metrics field guide, how do we actually put this to use? And this is really where the IEP University designation and award programs came in. IEP stands for Innovation and Economic Prosperity. And basically, it's a program that kicked off in 2013. APLU decided, and CICEP decided to take these tools, arm them with arm universities with these new tools and encourage them to go on a vigorous months-long progress to actually put them to use. So, it was during the pilot year, and there are others on the phone who were actually part of that inaugural year, so I'll defer some of that personal commentary to you. But during that year, a number of the universities that were interested in using these assessment tools, they had a little bit of an incentive. They said, if we are able to take these tools, take a look at our institution, apply some of these metrics, apply some of this economic engagement framework so we can better understand what our economic footprint looks like and what story it is that we want to tell, we have this opportunity to get this designation from APLU. So, it really was this little kind of modest carrot to encourage or to incentivize this type of behavior, to really take these tools and run with them. So again, the initial program kicked off in 2013. The tools that you all have access to now, they were in various stages of development at that time, but I believe in that first year we had about 30 or so universities that decided to go through the process with the hope of getting this IEP designation, and in the end 16 of them were designated as IEP universities. So, why do we care about a designation? What is the utility of that designation? Obviously, there's the bragging rights. It's certainly a source of pride to be able to say that your institution has been acknowledged as a leader in university economic engagement and impact. But most importantly, and I think anyone who's been through the process, whether they were designated or not, will attest to this, is that the benefit is really in the process itself. To be able to take these tools that have been test-driven, that have been peer-reviewed, and to adapt them to your own university is really a great way for institutions to be able to really think reflectively about not only where have we been, but what are some of the gaps? What are some of the opportunities as it relates to economic engagement? And it goes back to what I had said earlier, which is, with this new knowledge, thanks to these tools that have been made available over the last few years, it'll hopefully help to inform better decision making in the future. As your leadership is putting your strategies together for where you guys want to go, this could be a really great tool to help do that, to help build the requisite partnerships that you need. If we could just go to the next slide, I'll give just a little bit of history. So again, in 2013, there were 16 institutions that were designated. If I could add a little personal commentary, we were aware of the University of Illinois, where I'm at, we were aware of this process in year one. We actually decided not to go through with it because at that time we just weren't ready. And admittedly, my institution at that time was not very involved in CICEP, but this was one of those things that really got us engaged in CICEP and in APLU, and we're really grateful for that opportunity. So we were actually part of that second cohort of institutions that were designated, along with 13 others in 2014. And I know the process, it varied a bit. The application and designation process varied a bit from the first year. I think by then APLU and CICEP had worked out some of the kinks, but the main contours of the program remained the same, and they remain the same today, which is, again, using these economic engagement frameworks to do that type of self-assessment and to apply for a designation. One of the things that was really useful for us in the 2014 cohort, I'm not exactly sure how they did it in 2013, was this concept of learning communities. We were actually matched with universities that underwent the process the year before, so there was a kind of mentorship component that was built into the process that enabled universities to help one another. I know that's something that was implemented again in the year 2015 for the current cohort here in 2015, but I can tell you from us going through the process, it was really helpful for the University of Illinois system to be able to talk to another university system about how they went through the process and how they dealt with the issue of having multiple campuses to balance. So this idea of learning communities was something that was really, really helpful. The 2015 applicant cohort, I believe, just submitted their applications for designation, which is currently under review. But for the universities who are interested in pursuing this IEP designation in 2016, that process has actually started already. There's been at least one informational webinar to date. From earlier this year. It's been recorded. It is available online at APLU's website. We'd be happy to provide the URL for that. But that webinar talks a lot about the actual mechanics of the program, the process, timeline, all of those things that you might be interested in if your institution is looking at doing this potentially next year. The deadline to submit and to go through the process and submit for next year isn't until April 15th, which may seem like a long way off, but again, for anyone who's gone through this process before, they'll tell you that in order to do this right, it's an incredibly rewarding experience, but it does take a time commitment, so April really isn't too far off. So that's the designation program in a nutshell. Before I talk about the IEP Awards, does anyone have any questions about the designation? Or Suzanne, Mark, Terry, Dorothy, did any of you have anything to add at a high level?
Well, I'd actually like to hear from Suzanne, and the reason I would, this is Jan, I'd like to hear from Suzanne because all of these applications for the designation are peer-reviewed, and I got to be a reviewer on Texas Tech's application, and I thought it was just stellar. So I'd like to hear from Suzanne, how did you use the various tools, and what was the real value of the process for your university?
Thanks, Jan. Am I unmuted, Jim?
Nope, we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. Great. The IEP process was fantastic for Texas Tech. We started analyzing as we had a new president come in as well as a new VPR, and so it was great timing for us to go through the IEP process to really discover, okay, what are we good at already that we need to capitalize on, but also what are some of our weaknesses with regard to community and economic engagement, and really just too as how we were communicating our story. And we of course used the metrics and the assessment tools that we had in the IEP process, which really the way they helped us was that they identified some areas that we weren't necessarily tracking that we should, just to be able to determine where we are improving, but also just to be able to have more data moving forward for various purposes. However, the key part for us in the IEP process is that for those that haven't seen the application or proposal, it involves surveying the external community as well as your internal campus community and really evaluating where they perceive your institution's priorities are and then how your performance is on those priorities. And it was fascinating to see the difference between the external opinion versus the internal, and also where they overlapped. But it really has allowed us to develop a framework moving forward on how we can grow and improve, but also the strengths that we want to continue to capitalize on. So it's been a wonderful process. We continue to reference it. There's key points in our strategic plan that go along with the things that we have set as priorities for our institution. As well as our administrators. That's key when you're going through this process to have your support of your president or high-level administrators, because you are involving lots of different people on campus that you want to gain feedback from. So, Jan, does that answer some of what you were asking?
It certainly does. The other person who might want to comment is Mark, because your use of the process and going through the designation led to your winning an award as well.
Yes, it did, John. Everybody hear me?
Sure can.
Yes.
Okay, great. So there were a couple of points that Susanna touched on, which I think might be useful to sort of expand upon, especially for those on the call that are thinking about going through the designation process. And that is that, as Jim pointed out, this is a year-long process, and as Joey pointed out, this is a very involved process, but it is actually very valuable. And part of one of the elements that my university, the University of Houston, had taken advantage of was to use the CICEP framework to actually incorporate various strategic plans that let's say were already there, but had really no way to implement on a day-to-day basis. And I think one of the real value added of going through the CICEP process is that you can cannibalize a large amount of information that is already in your own institution, whether you know it or not. And part of the self-study is actually finding that information and getting it into one central location where it can be used to generate a coherent plan around the economic engagement function of the university. So that's one thing that I think that we learned early on, was that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The fact that the CICEP tools they're modifiable to your own particular institution, and you should look at it in that way. And that was actually very useful to us in that we were able to not only have a look at the sort of vertical integration of some of our efforts, but also look at the horizontal integration of our efforts, because both sets of CICEP metrics and tools allow you to actually custom build it for your needs. So those are the 2 points that I'd like to make around that, is that there's value to this process over and above what you see in the written materials, and that it is customizable to your own institution.
That's fabulous. One thing we should point out about the designation is it is a 10-year designation, and as a result, you have to re-up for it at the end of 10 years, and you also have to provide progress reports. So this is not just a do it once and then go back to sleep for 10 years. You actually have to stay engaged with your constituencies. Joey, why don't we talk a little bit about the IEP Awards?
Sure. Just very quickly, for those universities that ultimately are designated, they're eligible to apply for awards in one of 4 categories. One is talent, which honors institutions that are doing outstanding work in the education and workforce development space. The second category is innovation, honoring an institution doing great work in technology transfer, entrepreneurship, and business development. The third is the Place Award, which recognizes a university that's excelling in community, social, and cultural development work. And then the fourth category, it's called Connections. I think we called it overall in 2013, but it's called Connections now, which recognizes an institution that is able to make the connections between all of these university-engaged economic development areas. Again, this is it's a nice kind of icing on the cake. And it's a great way for universities to potentially have a little bit of friendly competition between one another. But really, the value here is that it allows all of this to really come full circle. So much of these tools and the metrics and the assessment tools were really built so that you could tell a better story about your university. And each of these universities that you see here that have won these awards in these categories have been able to do exactly that. And it really is a treat to see exactly how they've gone through that process and how they've applied those tools. So I know they'll be doing the IEP Awards program again for the 2015 IEP designees, which I believe will be announced tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, Joey. Jim, anything to add on the awards program?
No, I would just add, as Joey mentioned, that we are announcing tomorrow the 2015 designees, and that announcement will go out. Basically, we'll do a press release, but there's also a web page on the APLU website, which I put the link to in the chat window. It's aplu.org/IEP Universities. And if you check that webpage tomorrow after 10 a.m. Eastern or so, you will have information not just about the program and about our previous designees, but you'll also be able to see who the 2016 designees are. I'm sorry, 2015 designees. And I would also add to the conversation about the program that, as has been mentioned, it is an extensive process, although everybody tells us it's worth it. And we will be asking, so the submission deadline isn't until April, but if you are planning to participate or would like to participate, we do ask for a letter of intent by mid-September. And so, you know, if you think your institution's interested in participating, please let us know so that we can get you information about how to express your intent.
That's great. Now, I want to say just one thing.
Can I add one thing about the awards program before we move on? Because I really thought it was important. Being from the University of Cincinnati, we did win in the first year the overall. And I don't think I could emphasize enough the importance of tying it to some strategic initiative that's going on within your university or your ecosystem, your community. Because when we did it, we made it a key piece of our strategic planning process, which we were doing. Now, you're not going through a strategic planning process every year, but hopefully people are stepping back every year to see what progress they're making. But because of it's part of an overall strategic plan, that was really the kind of glue that allowed us to show the connectivity across place, talent, innovation, to pull that all together into an integrated whole. So I think that's really important, and it's really important in terms of picking it up to carry it forward as you work your self-analysis and your plans for how you're going to grow and improve going forward.
Well, and I think the coolest thing about the IEP designation and awards program is it has very clearly become the centerpiece of CICEP activities. But more importantly, I think this is a showpiece for the entire APLU, and can't say enough about Jim and all the people that work so hard to make this program happen. And that said, Jim, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so I will quickly tell you about some projects that CICEP has also been engaged in which we are collaborating with other organizations. First of all, there have been a couple of APLU task forces that CICEP has been part of, but that have engaged folks more broadly. One is a task force on managing university intellectual property. And I will momentarily put the link to the page that, well, actually, I'm not going to be able to put that link in the chat window because I don't know it off the top of my head. But we will send out as a follow-up a link to the webpage on the APLU site that talks about this task force. Basically, the task force got together and said, we want to make some recommendations to our institutions about how best to communicate the public purposes of technology transfer and managing university intellectual property. A similar task force was convened mainly of provosts and some others looking at how technology transfer is considered in tenure and promotion. And that task force is in the process of finalizing a report with some recommendations. And again, we'll send out the link to everybody as a follow-up. We've also been working on collaborations with the Business Higher Education Forum and with the Council on Competitiveness. And the focus of our work in both of these cases is really how do universities participate in innovation ecosystems, both from a perspective of how do they contribute to workforce and talent development, but also in what ways do they contribute to R&D and advancing technology. And the focus of each of these collaborations that we've been developing is university industry partnerships to make those kinds of things happen. And then finally, we've been working with a sister association, the University Economic Development Association, that is actually really focused, its membership is focused on the practice of university economic development, as would be suggested by the name of the organization. And what we've developed with them is a new publication called Higher Education Engagement and Economic Development, Foundations for Strategy and Practice. And it's kind of funny that we worked on the foundations last, but this is sort of this publication, which will come out within the next few weeks. It's at the designer now, in fact. this publication really kind of lays the underpinnings for the economic engagement framework that we talked about earlier and those tools. So watch for that publication as well, and we'll be sure to let you know when that comes out.
Great, thanks, Jim. Okay, now we're in the home stretch here. All of these activities that we've been talking about, how does all this happen? Well, the structure of how CICEP does its business is through a number of committees. There are 3 sort of governance committees for CICEP. There is the CICEP Executive Committee, which consists of presidents and chancellors and liaisons from a number of the other APLU councils, Council on Research, Council on Academic Affairs, Council on Engagement and Outreach, and then also a number of at-large members. There's the CICEP Implementation Committee, which are the chairs of other CICEP committees and working groups and at-large members, and we'll talk about those committees in a second. And then finally, there's a CICEP Advisory Board, which is composed of external members, non-university members. These might be from government, they might be from affiliated organizations, perhaps like the 2 that Jim just talked about, or they could be industry representatives. All of these provide guidance and advice for CICEP in how it does its business. Now the CICEP committees, which are in the next slide, these are the standing committees at the moment. 2 of them are working groups, the other ones are actually standing committees. And these are the committees that actually, in the case of the Economic Engagement Framework Committee, they actually help to create the tools and modify and keep as a living, growing thing the CICEP Economic Engagement Framework. There is a committee on information and collaboration, which is designed to do just those things, promote collaboration, share information, provide vehicles for the communication of best practices and activities. There is, of course, the Meeting Planning Committee. Oh, it looks like I made a mistake here because there also is the IEP Universities Committee. That should have been 2 different lines. There is a Meeting Planning Committee that helps to put together the agendas for both the annual meeting at the APLU in the fall, but also the CICEP summer meeting. There is an IEP Universities Committee that oversees the process, helps to mentor and guide the learning communities of universities that are going after the IEP designation each year. There is a Partnerships and Revenue Working Group. This is a group that is seeking to form partnerships between CICEP and external entities and also come up with sponsorship and revenue opportunities to bring revenue in to help fund the activities of CICEP. And then finally, there is a manufacturing working group, which is involved in initiatives related to advanced manufacturing, which is a topic of interest to many, if not all, public universities. So all of our commentators on the call today are involved in one or another of these groups, and I thought I would ask Terry, for example, who's been very involved in a number of these, most recently meeting planning, talk a little bit about how being on CICEP committees has actually helped you do your day job.
Okay, it really boils down to creating networks and just having benchmarks, having people that you can reach out to create benchmarks for yourself. The work that we do is really, there's so much work that is kind of unknown and in progress, and this group is fabulous. And every committee or working group that I've been on, I have learned a tremendous amount from the participants, and I have added significantly to my network of resources.
Oh, that's fabulous. Mark, can you talk a little bit about the manufacturing working group and the direction it's taking?
Sure. The original, in fact, actually the Advanced Manufacturing Working Group was the first entry for me into CICEP, and that was an interesting education for me. I've learned a lot about the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, which was a focus for APLU several years ago in terms of how APLU could guide some of that national conversation around that initiative. Since then, we've had a couple of developments at the national level, specifically the publication of a report called the Advanced Manufacturing Program 2.0 or AMP 2.0. And the group has sort of reinvented itself around a couple of the specific milestones or specific goals that are part of that AMP 2.0 report. So we have two parallel projects ongoing at present. One is a very focused one around CICEP and APLU serving as the lead organization with input and participation by our various institutions into a messaging campaign around career development in advanced manufacturing, in the advanced manufacturing sector. We also have a second project, which I'm sure Jim is going to brief that particular group about in the next couple of days, just to put a plug in, Jim, around whether we will be partnering with another national organization to look at potentially developing a national center that's focused on policy issues in higher education and the advanced manufacturing sector. So those are two projects that we are actively involved in. Part of what the group is trying to do is to identify opportunities to actually secure funding from either agencies or foundations to actually do this work.
That's great. So that gives you an example of the kinds of activities that some of our committees are engaged in. Dorothy, you've been involved in a number of these committees, and most recently you served as the secretary to the CICEP Executive Committee and the co-chair of the Implementation Committee. How has that been useful to you?
Well, I would probably second what others have said about the network that has opened up for me, the people that I can now contact that I know and know the kinds of things, the work that they're doing, and can go to them for advice or to discuss what we're doing or for a future collaboration. I think that's a pretty invaluable part of it. But the other part of it, I think, is being engaged puts you sort of in the center of what the growing trends are, and knowing where we need to be moving and to be part of that scene and to help shape that. And I find that a challenge, and I find it exciting and fun to do.
That's great. And I think that point about not only getting involved but helping to shape the future of some of these things at the national level, I think that is an incredibly valuable observation. Okay, so if you've lasted through this entire webinar, we are now at the point, we think we've got you. If you've stayed on the phone this long, we think we've got you. So Jim.
Okay, so first of all, just a quick thank you to Jan and Joey for leading us, and to our other commentators on today's webinar. I think it's been a fantastic opportunity to share some of the great things that we're doing. And for those of you who have hung out with us this long, we definitely hope we've got you. And all you have to do is just get in touch with Jan, Joey, or myself, or all three of us to let us know what you're interested in learning more about, and we'll be happy to share that information. We'll also be happy to send you some emails so that you can keep up to date with what's going on with CICEP. We really encourage you to join us at the APLU annual meeting in November. Again, in our follow-up information that we send out to you, we'll make sure that you have information about how to register for the annual meeting. And CICEP will have, a set of sessions at the annual meeting, and joining us for those sessions will give you an opportunity to learn more about what we're doing. We don't know yet where we're going to be having our summer meeting next year, but certainly planning, when that information comes out, planning to join us at the summer meeting will be a great way to learn more. And again, if you haven't yet received the IEP Universities designation, please do consider joining the 2016 cohort. And again, we'll send you, in follow-up information, we'll send you links and email addresses for all of these sort of next actions that you can take.
And I would add that the real reason to get involved with CICEP is that these are very fun people. I was going to use the picture of Jim in the rickshaw tours at Raleigh rather than his official photo, but this is a group that they are just a really good, thoughtful, clever, but just fun group of people to work with. So I highly encourage people to get involved.
Hear, hear.
With that, we've gone over time, and we really appreciate people hanging on for the length of time. If people have questions, I can stay on for a few more minutes to answer, but I think this is the end of the formal part of our show today. And I want to thank everybody. I also want to thank all of our expert commentators for joining us, Terry, Mark, Dorothy, and Suzanne.
Yeah, and thank you, Jan and Joey, for leading this for us.